Okay, get ready for a real head-scratcher today, because we're diving deep into the world of megaliths. We're talking massive stone structures
Yeah.
built millennia ago in Northern Europe.
Right.
And you know me, I can barely arrange throw pillows on a couch.
Huh.
So the very idea of people hoisting these giant stones has me completely baffled.
It is baffling, isn't it? What's fascinating is that these weren't built by some mysterious vanished civilization. We're talking about the Neolithic period
Right.
around the 5th millennium BC, and the people who built them, the TRB culture, were actually in the midst of a huge societal shift themselves.
TRB, that's one of those archaeologist abbreviations, right?
Right. It stands for Trichter and Becher,
Okay.
named after a distinctive style of pottery they used, funnel-necked beakers. But names aside, imagine this. These were folks transitioning from a hunter-gatherer lifestyle to farming. And as they settled down, their whole world began to change, including how they honored their dead.
And that's where these megaliths come in. I mean, the book you shared, The Megaliths of Northern Europe,
Right.
makes it clear these weren't just simple graves.
Exactly. Before they tackled those megastones, the TRB people were already building large earthen burial mounds called long barrows.
Interesting.
And get this, many were built directly atop abandoned TRB settlements. It's like they were intentionally linking the realm of the dead with places where life had been lived.
Okay, that sends shivers down my spine. Were they trying to keep those ancestors close, or maybe appease them in some
Well,
way?
there-
How does this Danubian influence play into all this? The book mentioned it briefly, but who were these Danubian people?
That's a great question. See, the TRB culture wasn't isolated. They were influenced by ideas and practices, likely including burial traditions from the Danubian people further south, who were also early farmers. This exchange of ideas across Europe at the time is incredibly important. But getting back to the long barrows themselves, they varied quite a bit. Some were simple, while others incorporated timber or even early stonework, showcasing their growing architectural skills.
So are these long barrels like a testing ground for the later megaliths?
In a way, yes. They show us this fascinating progression of ideas and skills that eventually culminated in those monumental stone structures we both find so intriguing.
Okay, so let's talk about the stars of the show, the megaliths themselves. The book focuses on two main types, dolmens and passage graves, right? What's the difference? They both sound pretty impressive to me.
They are impressive, and they also represent a fascinating evolution in megalithic architecture. Dolmens, which appear earlier in the archaeological record, are essentially chambers made of large, upright stones capped with a massive roof stone. Picture a giant stone table, and you've got the general idea.
Right, but then there are passage graves, which sound way more elaborate.
Exactly. Passage graves, as the name suggests, have a corridor or passage leading into a larger, often more complex burial chamber. These structures are truly awe-inspiring, not just in size, but also in their design and the sheer effort required to construct them.
I can only imagine. But the book mentions all these other terms too. Rundis, Langdis, Großsteingrab. It gets kind of confusing.
You're right. The terminology can be a bit of a maze. It reflects the attempts over the years, as archaeology developed as a field, to categorize these structures based on their shape, size, or regional variations. But here's another layer to this puzzle. The distribution of these megaliths isn't random. For instance, dolmens are strangely absent west of the Weser River in Germany, while passage graves are missing from other specific areas. This suggests there were regional preferences, or perhaps even distinct cultural groups within the broader TRB culture, each with its own unique approach to megalith building.
It's like these megaliths are giant stone puzzle pieces scattered across the landscape, each one hinting at a different aspect of the TRB culture.
Yeah.
But let's talk about the elephant in the room, or rather the giant rocks in the tomb. How did they actually build these things?
Right.
I mean, we're talking tons of stone
Yeah.
moved and placed with incredible precision.
Right. It's mind-boggling. We tend to think of Neolithic people as having only rudimentary tools. But the construction of these megaliths reveals a remarkable level of ingenuity and, even more importantly, coordinated effort.
So it wasn't just brute strength.
Muscle definitely played a part, but these people were incredibly resourceful. Midgley describes how they used a combination of stone tools, timber for rollers and levers, and possibly even sleds, to move these massive stones, sometimes over considerable distances. Imagine having to first locate a suitable stone, maybe miles away,
Right.
and then figure out how to transport it to the building site.
That blows my mind. Speaking of mind-blowing, the book also talks about how these megaliths were often covered in mounds of earth. Why go through all that extra effort? It's not like they were trying to hide them, right?
You're right, these monuments were meant to be seen. The mounds themselves played a crucial role in the overall design and symbolism of these structures. They weren't just piles of dirt, they were carefully constructed, often with layers of different materials, including burnt flint.
Burnt flint. What's the significance of that?
That's a great question, and archaeologists are still debating the finer points. But one theory is that the act of burning had ritualistic significance, and the placement of white burnt flint specifically seems intentional, perhaps reflecting beliefs about purity or the afterlife. Imagine the visual impact. These massive stone structures rising from the landscape, cloaked in earth mounds, with the glint of white flint catching the sunlight. It must have been an awe-inspiring sight.
It really makes you think about the effort involved, not just the physical labor, but also the time and planning. These clearly weren't just quick afterthought burials. They were carefully orchestrated rituals, meant to honor the dead and perhaps even influence the afterlife.
Absolutely. And speaking of rituals, this is where it gets even more interesting. Midgley dedicates a good portion of the book to the twin stones found at some megalithic sites. They split these huge boulders in half, sometimes transporting the two halves to different monuments. It's like a giant prehistoric matching game.
Okay, now my mind is officially blown. What's the significance of splitting these stones and placing them so deliberately?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's like they're trying to communicate something profound, but we're only just beginning to decipher the message. One idea is that it relates to the concept of duality, which seems to have been a recurring theme in Neolithic cosmology. The twin stones might represent the balance between life and death, male and female, or even the earthly realm and the afterlife. And it's not just the stones themselves, there are even twin passage graves like Troldstern in Denmark that are mirror images of each other.
So it's not just about burying the dead, it's about reflecting a deeper understanding of the cosmos, the very nature of existence.
Exactly. And here's another layer to consider. The book mentions that megaliths were often situated within a wider ceremonial landscape. So it's not just about the individual structures themselves, but also how they interact with other features in the surrounding area.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, near some megaliths, archaeologists have unearthed what they call cult houses.
Okay.
These were special structures, likely used for rituals and ceremonies related to death and the afterlife. And what's fascinating is that these cult houses were often intentionally burned or dismantled, highlighting the importance of ritual in their life cycle. It's like they were closing a chapter, making way for new beginnings. And then there are the causewayed enclosures, which were massive ditched enclosures.
I've seen illustrations of those. They look kind of like giant earthworks. What were they used for?
That's a question that has puzzled archaeologists for years. They might have been gathering places for large groups, possibly for feasts, ceremonies, or even trade. Some scholars believe they may have functioned as spaces where people from different communities could come together, perhaps for ritualistic purposes, or even to settle disputes and maintain social cohesion.
Okay, so we're talking about a complex society with elaborate rituals, large-scale gatherings, and this incredible knowledge of engineering and architecture.
Yeah.
It makes you realize that our ancestors were far more sophisticated than we often give them credit for.
Absolutely. And that sophistication extended to their burial practices as well.
So we've got these incredible structures, these megaliths that required massive effort to build, and were clearly more than just places to put the dead. What was the actual burial process like? I mean, did they do the same thing everywhere, or were there variations?
That's one of the things that makes studying these megaliths so fascinating. There's no single answer.
Okay.
The book mentions evidence of both single and collective burials. Sometimes they interred the whole body, while other times they rearranged or even removed certain bones.
Okay, that's both fascinating and a little creepy.
Yeah.
What's with rearranging the bones?
It definitely sparks the imagination, doesn't it? It seems their relationship with the dead was an evolving one. Early dolmens, those simpler stone chambers, suggest single use.
Yeah.
But later dolmens, and especially the passage graves, show signs of repeated access and manipulation of the remains. It's like they were engaging in an ongoing dialogue with their ancestors.
Like those ancestors were still very much present in their lives.
Exactly. And here's another intriguing detail from the book. They built these chambers to be remarkably dry. Midgley points out that this would have aided decomposition. It makes you wonder, did they understand this process and use it intentionally as part of their rituals? It's like they were trying to influence not just the realm of the dead, but the very process of death itself.
Yeah, that's a powerful idea.
Yeah,
It's like they were trying to impose order on the ultimate unknown.
right. And they weren't just burying anyone in these megaliths. The book highlights that the individuals laid to rest there were often special in some way, perhaps leaders, shamans, or individuals with particular skills or knowledge.
So it's about creating a lineage, a connection to powerful figures from the past. Did they believe these ancestors could still influence their lives, offer protection or guidance?
It's very likely. And it wasn't just about individual ancestors, but also about creating a collective identity, a sense of belonging to a group with a shared past and a common destiny. These megaliths, these monumental efforts, weren't just tombs. They were statements about who the TRB people were, where they came from, and where they believed they were going.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about these megaliths as physical structures, but it sounds like they were also deeply symbolic, imbued with meaning on multiple levels.
Absolutely. They were points of connection, linking the living with the dead, the past with the present, the earthly realm with the cosmos. It's no wonder they were often placed along ancient routes, as the book mentions. They were waypoints, not just in a physical sense, but perhaps also in a spiritual one.
And that brings us back to where we started, doesn't it? With this idea of journeys. We began this deep dive talking about how these megaliths, for you and me, are journeys into the past.
Yeah.
But for the TRB people, they were also journeys into the afterlife, into the mysteries of existence.
And you know, what strikes me is how these ancient structures still speak to us today. We may not fully understand their meaning, their purpose, but we can't help but be moved by them, by the sheer effort, the artistry, the enduring mystery they represent.
It makes you realize that even though millennia have passed, some things are timeless. Our fascination with the unknown, our desire to connect with something larger than ourselves, and our need to make sense of our place in the grand scheme of things. And who knows, maybe these megaliths, these silent sentinels of the past, still hold some of those answers waiting to be unlocked if we just know how to listen.